Hello and welcome to Ask MotorInc. I'm extra excited now because we are on the run up to Diwali, which means a lot of new two-wheelers suddenly arrive on the market. It's been a lot of testing. A few products, they don't match up to the standard I was expecting. You'll see them on MotorInc first. Others have really blown us away. You'll see all of those on MotorInc first too. Today we're going to deal with questions, and as you should know by now, these questions come from MotorInc Circles, which is a small part of our app where you can ask questions. People help you answer your questions before we get to you, and it's a great conversation to have. We're going to start with Goswami 12. He started motorcycling 2 months ago at 31 years of age. Awesome. Welcome to the fun side. And he says he has had sporadic neck pain diagnosed as early sign spondylitis, but it has never lasted more than a week. Recently, after a 50-kilometer leisurely city and highway ride, he started to feel a pain in his right arm that spiraled from the neck. The arm pain has gone away, the neck pain is still there, and now he's beginning to get a little bit worried about it. He's asking that while he is seeking medical attention, will handlebar risers help? He has an Xpulse 210. He's 5 foot 10 inches tall. 2, should he change the stock seat into a rally or a touring kind of seat? 3, should he consider changing his helmet? He has an LS2 Stream 2. Or are there any other kinds of neck straps that motorcyclists can use? And he's saying he loves motorcycling. It really makes him feel alive, and he'd rather not have to give it up. So the first thing I would say is, when it is a situation like this where you know there is a medical condition, instead of looking at the motorcycle, you first start with the medical attention and you ask your doctor, what is this pain coming from and what are the solutions to it? Assuming that because the only thing you changed is motorcycle or parts of the motorcycle might be the source of the pain, I would say it sounds logical, but it usually goes sideways. We have had other cases of people who have upper body pains of various sorts, and it was a medical diagnosis that led to a solution, not changing the parts of the bike. That's part number 1. Part number 2, let's make sure you sit well and correctly on the motorcycle, for which your lower body should be hard at work and your upper body should not be in any way stressed at all. And what that means is, from your ankles to your belt line, roughly, everything should be positively engaged in making sure you're holding on to the motorcycle as firmly as possible. If you do this correctly, your core muscles, that's your abs, they will start to engage automatically. You don't have to focus on them really, but it will leave your chest, shoulders, arms, that's upper arm and forearm, everything relatively loose. And usually this is not a strenuous way to sit on a motorcycle. If you can get this right, most of the time a long ride will produce the usual kind of ache and pain we get from a long ride, and usually on the side of the thigh, the outside thighs, but usually nowhere else. To me, this would be the first thing that I would try to change. Second, from the information you're giving us, you're riding an Xpulse 210 and you're already 5 foot 10 inches tall. So I would actually think that handlebar risers will not change anything. You're roughly in the zone where the stock handlebar should just work. Is the seat contributing to this? It's more likely that you're sitting badly rather than you have a poor seat. From what I remember of testing the Xpulse, I don't really have a clear memory of the seat being distinctly super good or super bad, which usually for my testing means it was okay. Third, your helmet. There is a chance that you're using a slightly heavy helmet. Maybe there is a helmet out there with a better balance, but this is a trial and error process, and I'm not sure that it leads to a one-step solution. So I would say stick with the helmet for the minute. And are there neck straps or any other things that we use to support our neck? Not really. But usually, as you ride motorcycles more and more, your neck muscles get used to the weight on the helmet on them. There is a transition phase while it feels like the neck is working a little bit. It can feel a little sore at the end of the ride, but it usually cures itself. So to me, first step, go to the doctor and make sure this is not your spondylosis coming back. If it is, it needs to be treated as that, and motorcycles may or may not be a contributing factor. And the second thing and the free thing is, please sit correctly and see if the neck pain resolves itself. These are the 2 things I will do. I will tell you this, I went through a phase where I had sustained neck pain and it would keep coming back and I would get stiff necks for a long time. And I kept thinking, maybe I'm riding too much, maybe my neck needs to be stronger, I need to exercise it. When I went to my doctor, he said, your pillow is too old. Your pillow needs to be thrown. You either need a flatter, firmer, new pillow, or you need to actually learn how to sleep without a pillow. As soon as I started to sleep without a pillow, the neck pain completely disappeared. So to me, it's not necessary that the motorcycle is causing this, so don't stress about it too much. The next question is from the Yellow Jacket, and he's saying, will bar and mirrors allow better handlebar weight distribution and improved handling, as counter steering should be easier with the added weight as compared to close to center stock mirrors? In theory, yes. in practice, they're not going to make enough of a difference. If you think about it, and you can try it on your bike, even if you don't have bar end mirrors, take your handlebar and remove the bar end weights and ride it, and you will discover that you can see a difference in the vibration level that you feel, but it won't fundamentally change how you steer a motorcycle. So honestly, this is not going to make much of a difference. What the bar end mirrors will do is they will more or less ruin what you can see behind yourself. It makes you less safe. It's not like all bar end mirrors are terrible, but typically the center mounted mirror, as you're calling it, on stocks, they will show you the best view behind, especially if they're adjusted correctly. So to me, this seems like an idea that's saying, that seems like a good idea. In practice, it will not make any real difference at all. In fact, if you wanted to have more leverage and make your steering easier, I would say maybe look for a even wider handlebar and gain more leverage. To give you an example, if you take a Hero Maverick, for example, because I know the number there, they made the handlebar 30 millimeters wider than what is usual for that class of motorcycles, and that really does make a difference. So if you take a wider handlebar, which improves your leverage, you might get an advantage from it. But remember, the more and more leverage you have, the less and less feeling for the motorcycle and that fine-tuned control over your steering you will have. So this is not an endless payback situation. There will be a point at which it will start to feel worse than it is. So, good idea. Will not make as much of a difference as you think. Okay, this is a difficult question to answer in most situations, fair warning. And many of us will have gone through this situation, and there are no easy and straightforward answers to this. Rishi says he lost a very dear friend who was like a brother to him in an accident. He hasn't processed the trauma really well. He also understands why and how the accident happened. He was speeding. He keeps thinking, however, how can he ride better every day? But sometimes he gets severe anxiety thinking, what if this would be my last ride? Rishi says he never speeds, but when he does, it's on empty stretches and within limits. And his question really is, how do you keep riding after knowing that his buddy ended his riding career very suddenly? And how can he deal with the anxiety that's eating him up? He's saying sorry for the long and depressing backstory, but he thinks of MotorInc as the best platform to ask for help. I appreciate that. He has been to therapy, so please don't tell him to go to therapy. I've read the comments on this post, and they are very, very thoughtful and sensitive comments, but I will say this. I solved this by realizing that motorcycles can kill you very early on in my career, and therefore that idea that saying this could be my last ride, to me, I suppose I've normalized it by now, so I don't think about it in those drastic terms. I'm aware that there is an edge case scenario where that could happen on the way to work today or on the way back home today when I finish recording this and on my way home. I accept that this is one possible outcome. To prevent this from being the only outcome, I do what I can, which means I practice my skills. Even today, I will pay attention to that. Why I go to the racetrack a lot is not just because I like to teach at the racetrack, but also because I know it keeps me sharper on the motorcycle in terms of my skills. I will wear the best gear I can afford, and there is no situation where I will not be wearing the best gear I've got, and so on and so forth. So you make physical and mental accommodations for the idea that it is possible to crash on motorcycles. It is possible to walk away from most crashes and be slightly embarrassed about it, but there is a number of crashes where the injuries are more severe. They can be life-threatening, and they can be career-ending, and they can be life-ending also. This is the nature of the real world. As soon as you accept that this is the nature of the real world, things do become easier. I don't know if this actually helps you, Rishi, or not, but to me, just the idea that this can and will happen, just the idea that every human you know and you will possibly get to know in your life, they will all die at some point. Just the idea that this is a known endpoint to everything that we call life, and that doesn't mean that we can't live our life until that point, as sudden as it may be. I think just that realization should help. Think this through. If the anxiety cripples you from riding motorcycles, it's all right. Get back on the motorcycle one step at a time. Make short rides, make rides that make you happy until you get back in the flow of things is the only thing that you can really do. And the last question is from Cat0 or Cat0 if you prefer. How is .5.1 brake fluid? Via personal experience, he knows I like .5 or 5.1 a lot. I put it in all my bikes, but a local and trusted mechanic of his says they won't be good when cold and he should stick to .4 for regular use. Cato clarifies that he does ride aggressively sometimes and sometimes he rides calmly. What would you guys recommend he puts? So look, where your mechanic is wrong is that if the brake fluid is cold, it doesn't really affect its performance. right? So like all fluids, there will be a lowest temperature beyond which it cannot work, and that will probably be in the negative degree, so we don't have to worry about it too much. But cold brake fluid works just as well as warm brake fluid because that's what it's supposed to do. The difference is where the fluid starts to boil, the pressure in the hydraulic system cannot be maintained consistently anymore. And that's the point where the difference between the two fluids will appear. Dot 4 boils earlier. Racing grade dot 4 you can find them now in India also. Racing grade dot 4s boil later, and 5.1s are supposed to be the highest boiling point of the three. As far as I can tell, all of these three can be mixed with each other also. It just becomes less predictable in terms of what the final outcome in terms of the boiling point is. That's all. But if you are running low, you have 5.1, you're out on the highway, all you can find is dot 4 and you add it back to 5.1, the motorcycle will work perfectly. The boiling point will come down a little bit. You just don't know to what point, but it consistently stays to that. What we are trying to get to with 5.1 is we're just increasing the latitude of conditions during which the brake fluid will do its job consistently and predictably, so that I can use my brakes as confidently as I always do. When you are an aggressive rider, the chances are you are putting more heat into your brake system, and therefore we'd like to have a brake fluid that accounts for the extra heat. You know how they say that a manufacturer designs a motorcycle for as many human beings as possible, so the average motorcycle rider, and you're saying you ride aggressively, so you are on one side of this, you are relatively speaking a fringe kind of rider, and at the fringe you might need slightly different equipment. One of the cheapest pieces of those equipment is dot 5.1. So to me, I know you trust your mechanic, but in this case he's just flat out wrong. You will in most riding situations notice no difference at all between 4 and 5.1. If the mechanic bleeds both the systems, which is to make sure there's no air in the system, if he bleeds both the systems equally well, in most riding conditions they're going to feel exactly the same. When you start to ride harder, use the brakes more, that fluid will start to heat up. There will be a point where dot 4 will give up, and you will see that as the lever becoming longer and longer, which means it comes closer and closer to the bar, whereas 5.1 will resist that for a much longer time, and that's the advantage we're looking for. Given how cheap 5.1 is versus 4, honestly this is just a no-brainer. I do it because I know I ride aggressively, I know that I can be hard on the brakes in those situations, and I would just rather have that latitude. That's it. Okay, there's a lot of questions. We're going to take one more before we sign off. And this is from the Weekend Mechanic. And he says, when we change tires and put a different brand of tires compared to the OEM tire, do we also change the stock recommended tire pressure, or does it stay the same irrespective of brands? Does it change if you're changing from radial to bias tires? From what I understand from manufacturers, the tire pressure is calculated for the OEM tire and for a general purpose use case. And therefore, when you change tires, typically you do not alter your tire pressures. So to give you an example, the motorcycle I've ridden the longest as an owner was my Ducati Multistrada 1200, which I put 55,000 kilometers on. And I think I changed 5 sets of tires in total. Let's call it 10,000 each. And there were a bunch of Pirellis in there and Michelins in there and Metzlers in there. And I always started at stock pressures. If I remember correctly, at that point, it was 36, 36. And they would always start at 36, 36. What I discovered as I rode the motorcycle and sort of thought about how does it feel to ride this motorcycle with this new tire is that, for example, Michelin and Metzeler generally make slightly stiffer sidewalls. Pirellis typically prefer much softer sidewalls. So you could run lower tire pressures on the Metzeler and the Michelin and have it feel correct to you, whereas the Pirellis could run at stock and feel nice. And this difference that I'm saying is 2 psi, maybe 3 psi at the maximum, never more dramatic than this. So to me, one, you're overthinking this slightly. To me, stock pressures are a great place to start no matter what tire changes you're making. To me, this is especially true because I don't recommend that you change tire sizes significantly anyway. The OEM has also put in a lot of work to validate and verify that these are the rightest possible tire sizes for your bike. You might have the latitude to go up one section or down one section at the maximum. That will not change your fundamental tire pressure requirement. If the manufacturer's been thorough, you will also discover completely different tire pressure sets for a loaded motorcycle and unloaded motorcycle. Usually that means more tire pressure at the back. That's about as much as I would do. What you will see on your new tire, the non-OEM tire, is the maximum recommended tire pressure for that tire. And what that means is if you inflate the tire beyond that many psi, the sidewalls, the carcass, the structure is not designed to take more pressure than that. So to me, it's very rare. I've actually never seen it happen at all. But there is a situation, possibly theoretically, that you are saying my stock recommended tire pressure is 42 psi and this tire only takes 36. What should you do? First, that tire does not belong on that motorcycle. And if I had to ride that tire on that motorcycle, let's call it an emergency, I just need to get to the nearest town where I'll actually get a tire. I would not go past 36 psi if that's what's marked on the sidewall. Although I'm telling you 100%, this just never happens. Last, he's asking, how do you know a tire pressure gauge that you're using is accurate? Is there a preference between digital and analog? And is there a particular budget beyond gauges are more accurate? First, I'm not an expert on this subject, but if you use a tire pressure gauge, yours versus petrol pumps, lots versus the tire pressure inflators that you get from Amazon, etc. First, you will discover that there's quite a bit of variation, and hardcore specialist tire pressure gauges are the best to use. As I understand it, analog pressure gauges are more likely to fall out of calibration than digital ones, and digital ones hold on to their calibrations longer in terms of when you change a battery, it still retains its calibration state, is how I understand it. The gauge I use is purchased from Big Bad Bikes. It's a brand called Cruise Tools, and they make a digital tire pressure gauge which should be about 1600 rupees. I'm using my third one now. I broke the first one, the second one the battery leaked and it died, and the third one is running well. All three have gone through cell changes and all three retained their calibrations until something else destroyed that gauge. It's what I would go to. If you buy a cheap tire pressure gauge, I can guarantee that the calibrations may be good on day one, and at the end of that month they may not be great. But the only way to really calibrate a tire pressure gauge is basically to keep measuring what it's showing against other gauges and see whether you're in the same ballpark or not, because the actual measurement equipment to calibrate your tire pressure gauge is just way too expensive. This is how I would do this, and you should know at MotorInc we are checking tires for pressure twice a day, more or less, because there's a test car that is coming in or a test bike that is coming in, or we are going testing and we need to re-verify the pressures when cold and so on and so forth. So this tire pressure gauge is in very, very heavy use and it absolutely just works. If you spend this 1500 odd rupees and buy a decent digital tire pressure gauge, you just have to spend on batteries more or less and it will just flat out work. Right. That was an interesting and thought-provoking set of questions. If you have more questions like this that you would like answered by us and by MotorInc fam, I invite you to come to MotorInc Circles. Circles is completely free to use. Post your question there. Use the hashtag AskMotoring. But if you do know your stuff, you don't have to be asking questions. You'll discover lots of people who need your help, and I encourage you to please help them as well and as much as you can on MotorInc Circles. MotorInc Circles is part of the MotorInc app. The app has always been free to download. Sign up is super simple. If you've not tried it, here's your invitation to come join us on MotorInc.